Well, good morning. If we haven't met yet, my name is Tommy. I'm one of the pastors here, and my family originates in Connecticut. You may know this part of the story. We moved when I was like 7 or 8, so there's not a whole lot I remember about Connecticut. One of the things that I do is that in my first grade Christmas production, I played Santa Claus. And the reason I remember is because it was an awkward thing to play, but I was a little bit chubby and a little bit jolly, and so they said, that kid, right? And so they slapped one of those fake beards on me, which I'll never forget. That thing was so itchy. And despite being already a little bit jolly, they thought, let's put a little pillow under his shirt, right? So they made it like, and that's the part that I especially remember, is on the stage there in front of all of those people dressed as Santa Claus with this fake beard that made my face itch and this pillow shoved up under my shirt. I had to get out of the sleigh, and as I did, I fell on my face. Thank you for the sympathy, right? I remember thinking at that moment, it's like, I cannot relate to Santa Claus. There's not a whole lot there to relate to. And then, of course, as I grew up, and you hear the Christmas story, the real Christmas story, I remember kind of listening differently, listening for characters that you could relate to. And I suppose a good question as we start out today, as we move into Christmas, is who do you most identify with? Who do you identify with most closely in the Christmas story? For me, I remember as a kid going, Mary, I don't think so. Like Joseph, I don't know that much about him. The shepherds, I know they were scared. I'm scared a lot. Maybe them, the magi, the wise men, not really. Wisdom isn't something that, and then baby Jesus, I'm like, I can't relate to baby Jesus, right? I don't know who it is for you. I'll tell you who it was for me. And this might surprise you, and I hope this will become clearer as we go. The person that I honestly most closely identify with from that Christmas story is who we might consider the villain of Christmas, right? The person that I identify with most closely is King Herod, which is a great quality to have in your pastor, by the way. Everybody is sitting here going, yeah, okay, this is the guy that's going to tell us about Jesus. I'll tell you why in a few minutes, why I associate so much or identify so much with King Herod. I think basically the argument I'm going to make today is that there's a King Herod in all of us. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Matthew chapter 2. Open up to Matthew chapter 2. If you didn't bring a Bible, you can raise your hand. Somebody will bring you one. We'll be able to look at this together. You can take notes, circle, underline, highlight. And as you turn there, I want to tell you just a little bit of background information about King Herod, because Matthew writes his gospel as if you know him already. Matthew writes his gospel as if you grew up there, you're familiar with King Herod. Matthew writes his gospel assuming that Herod will be enshrined forever in history. Now, King Herod was the client king of Judea, which meant that Rome made him the king of Judea. And he wasn't even Jewish, which of course drove the Jewish people crazy. He sort of dabbled with Judaism. He sort of pretended to be Jewish. He didn't eat bacon. Like there was stuff like that. He was the king of Judea in the time that Jesus was born. And he's a very smart guy, very talented ruler, politically astute, very, very, very ambitious. Known in that day and age as a builder because he rebuilt the Jewish temple. He built port cities. He built aqueducts. He built all kinds of things. He was an extraordinary person when it came to his talent. But his ambition got the better of him in the end, which is where I think a bunch of us could probably relate to him. Before we get to the Bible part, let me tell you my favorite King Herod story. My favorite story of King Herod. You remember in college and in high school, you studied the story of Julius Caesar and the Senate, and Shakespeare kind of retold it, right? How they murdered him on the Senate floor and that whole "You too, Brutus" thing. And all, that happens about 44 BC. Well, Caesar dies. When he dies, his nephew Octavius, who eventually gets renamed Caesar Augustus, hang with me. His nephew Octavius and his friend Mark Antony decided they were going to avenge the death of Julius Caesar. And so they join forces and they go out and they destroy all the people responsible for the death of his uncle Julius Caesar. Well, at this time, everybody in the empire kind of realized that once all the enemies were destroyed and these two men who had joined forces were left standing, eventually those two guys were going to come to a head, right? Because there's only room for one sheriff in Rome. And so these guys, they gain more and more power. Both of them have the allegiance of certain numbers of Roman legions, and this is where Herod comes in, right? Herod befriended Mark Antony, and he had this very famous wife from Egypt, who you may remember as Queen. Three of you remember Queen Cleopatra. The Roman citizens, they hated Cleopatra, right? Because she came from Egypt and they thought that she was going to unite Rome and Egypt and all these kind of strange beliefs and misgivings about Cleopatra. Well, sure enough, over time, King Herod, he's hosting all these parties with Cleopatra and Mark Antony. He continues to send them these lavish gifts. He's very loud about his support for them. He supported them in a rebellion that they were a part of right south of Alexandria. And so over time, as these two men become more and more powerful, more and more famous, there's actually, just like was predicted, a civil war that occurs between them. And unfortunately for Herod, he bet on the wrong horse. He backed the wrong guy because Mark Antony and his allegiance were immediately defeated. They hightailed it back to Alexandria, and within a very short period of time, Julius Caesar's nephew, Octavius, who becomes Caesar Augustus, he becomes the very first emperor of Rome. So the civil war has just happened. Mark Antony is gone. Herod's in Judea, and he's realizing slowly, like, oh no, I backed the wrong person. And he knows that the new leader is going to come for him, right? And he has kind of three options. He can just sort of go ahead and off himself, get it over with, because that's where this is headed. He could run, but they're going to find him, or he can just hunker down and pray that they ignore him. But Herod is so politically astute. This is so amazing. He's so ambitious and he's so all about his legacy that he does something unbelievable that turns out to be unbelievably smart. He gets on a boat. He goes to the island of Rhodes where he knows Caesar Augustus, who's Octavius. He knows Caesar Augustus is on that island. And Herod rolls up on this boat and basically knocks on the door and asks to speak to the emperor of the Roman Empire, most powerful person in the world, who, by the way, is going to come for him to kill him. And everybody's looking at Herod going, dude, why are you here? Like, you just came to the front door of the guy. You're an enemy of the state, right? We're going to eventually deal with you and come after you. And you've come to us. And I mean, they can't believe their eyes. And so, of course, they go, Caesar Augustus, you got to come to guess who's here? You're never going to believe. King Herod of Judea, who supported your adversary, our enemy who we're getting ready to go look for, he's here. And so they let him in. And Herod gives this spectacular speech in front of everybody there, in front of Caesar Augustus. And here's essentially what he says. He goes, as you know, I was a friend of your enemy, Mark Antony. And as you know, I was a loyal supporter of his from the beginning to the end, through the Civil War, all the way to the end. So what you know about me is that when I pledge my allegiance to someone, when I pledge my loyalty to someone, I am loyal to them to the end. And oh, great Caesar, if you stick with me or allow me to stick with you, I pledge my loyalty to you. It's a moving speech. Well, Caesar Augustus, he's so amazed and he's so impressed that not only did he give him the kingdom of Judea, he gave him Samaria, he gave him Jericho and Gaza as well, and he sends him home. That's who we're dealing with in this story. That's King Herod, this super bright, politically astute, extremely ambitious guy. But the thing that got him in trouble so consistently is that he was so committed to his own control. He's so committed to his own legacy that he just made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. He changed his will 4 times. Right? Always trying to negotiate outcomes. He has 10 wives. He's got a bunch of sons. And every few years, he would label one of those sons the heir apparent. He'd have the will written for that son to be in charge. And then something would happen where he'd look at that son and go, oh boy, you are not king material. Oh no. You're not going to be the king. So he'd change his will. And then after he changes his will, when he notices that son isn't going to work out, he would have his own son executed to keep him from coming for the throne. So after a while, after he changes sons like this and has them executed, I imagine being one of his sons is like, no thanks, Dad. Like, I don't know if I want to be king. Like, I'm kind of content just being right here, right? He's so committed to controlling his kingdom, growing his kingdom. And what he wants most is a legacy. He wanted forever and ever and ever for there to be somebody on the throne who was related to him over Judea. He kills one of his wives. He murders so many rabbis in Jerusalem that rabbis didn't want to be anywhere near Jerusalem. When King Herod got mad, people died. Like, he took it out on everybody because he wants to maintain control of his kingdom and control of his legacy. And when we get to the biblical narrative about the birth of Jesus, and you may know this, King Herod is about 70 years old, and he has a really, really, really painful kidney disease, made even worse by gangrene. He's very, very, very sick. He's trying to consolidate his power. He's trying to make sure that the next generation carries on his legacy because he knows he's about to go. And that's when he gets the most disturbing news imaginable. You kind of got to understand all of that going on in the background. He knows he's about to die. He's moved heaven and earth his whole life long to make sure his legacy goes on. And 5 miles south of him, he gets word of a new king who's kind of just learning to walk, right? Here's how Matthew introduces the story. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, circle, underline, highlight, that King Herod. That's the one that we're talking. Matthew assumes that you know him. Magi, or we might call them wise men, come from the east to Jerusalem, and they ask this. Now imagine how this question lands. Imagine his reaction to this question. They're wandering around the city of Jerusalem. After all this work to set up his legacy, they're wandering around the city of Jerusalem asking this question. Verse 2, where is the one who's been born, circle, underline, highlight, King of the Jews? Where is the one who's been born the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose. We've come to worship him. We've come to Jerusalem because it's the capital city. We know we're close. Where's the one who was born the King of the Jews? We want to worship him. And what's so interesting, and we may not know this, but Matthew assumes that you do, Herod had given himself the title King of the Jews. Herod was not Jewish by birth. Herod decided to dabble with Judaism. Herod took on some of the qualities of Judaism, but he also murdered his own kids. And so the Jews were like, you're not really Jew. So to consolidate that power and to flex on the people of Judea, he gave himself the title King of the Jews, right? One church father, Augustus, writes that it would have been better to have been Herod's pig than to be his own son. Because he pretended to be Jewish. He didn't eat bacon. You wouldn't get slaughtered or butchered if you were his pig. But if you were his son, maybe. And he so dominated the region, he gave himself this title. And now these strangers roll into town and roam around asking, where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? Not the one who's given himself the title King of the Jews. Not the one who's flexing on the Jews. Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? Verse 3, when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. And now you know why. Because when Herod gets upset, people die. This is why Jerusalem is disturbed also. Now that you have a little bit of background, you can understand when King Herod gets upset, this is dangerous. When he's disturbed, he's likely to do anything. And now he's an older man. He's desperate. He's in pain. And suddenly his legacy and his future of his control over the kingdom is at risk. When he gets disturbed, people die. The story continues, verse 4. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, imagine being them, by the way. King Herod wants to see you. I would be flipping out just a little bit. I mean, you got to imagine it. Whenever you get called to be in front of King Herod, if you were a Jew, you were scared. He's calling all the people with power, all the people with answers, all the religious people inside. And he asked them into one meeting, and he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. Verse 5, they answer, in Bethlehem. And they're thinking, you should know this, by the way. Like, you call yourself Jewish, you're the King of the Jews, right? Everybody knows this. Every little Jewish boy knows this passage from the Jewish Bible. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. And then they quote this prophecy, verse 6, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. I mean, this has been predicted. This has been prophesied years and years and years before. And for Herod, this is like the worst news imaginable. He's like, wait, you're just telling me this? There's someone that's going to roll up in here called the King of the Jews, verse 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly. Always got a plan. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time that the star had appeared. Herod goes, I want to talk to those guys. You seen those guys? Bring them in here. I'm going to see if I can get some information because I need to get in front of this and I need to control this. I need to see if I can steer it. He sent them, verse 8, to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Like he's always got a plan. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, their joy is full. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and I love this line, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Now this word worship, I mean, it's one we're familiar with because of modern church, right? We make it synonymous with singing, but it's not singing. Worship is recognizing that you're in the presence of someone who should cause you to have awe. And then essentially doing whatever you need to do physically, emotionally, mentally to surrender yourself or submit yourself to them. The word in the Greek is the word proskuneo. It's a compound word. Pros means unto, and then that kind of root word after the prefix is the word kune, which means dog, surprisingly. You're like, dog, why? Because the actual origin of the term depicts the image of a dog licking his master's hand. In the New Testament, it's used to mean just that, to kiss the hand of someone in a token of absolute reverence. And some of the more eastern parts of the world, especially in Persia, where these men were from, it means to fall upon the knees and to touch the ground with your forehead as an expression of profound reverence, to fawn, to adore. So these very, very, very wealthy men who had traveled a very, very, very long way, they're in the presence of a baby who has no actual physical power over them. But because of who they believe this baby to be, they drop to their knees and they worship him. It's so much more than when you first glance at it. This is a powerful, powerful, powerful reaction. And guys, 5 miles away, 5 miles down the road, King Herod is worried to death. He's pacing the throne room. Have you seen those guys? Anybody seen those guys? Like, I want somebody to stand out at the road and tell me if you see those guys. Tell me as soon as you see those guys, because he's so worried about controlling things. His whole life has been preserve, protect, and control. Preserve, protect, control. Preserve, protect, control. So with his fist clenched, racked in pain, he's not about to bow his knee to anybody. He's not about to worship anyone or anything. And it's for that reason I kind of go, man, isn't there a little King Herod in all of us? Because you understand this. I don't mind leveraging God if God's going to help me build my kingdom. I don't mind kissing a ring or bowing if that's going to bring my kingdom here. But the whole idea of writing God or writing anybody a blank check with your life, the idea of worshiping, of surrendering, of saying to someone, the answer is yes. Now tell me what's the question. That doesn't come natural to any of us, does it? Like, we want to know the details first, and we want to make sure that we'll be remembered, we'll be honored, we'll be respected in the end. Why? Because there's a little King Herod inside all of us, isn't there? Story continues. Verse 13, when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt. And you can kind of hear the soundtrack changing in the background now, can't you? Story continues. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted, verse 16, outwitted, circle, underline, highlight. When Herod had realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. Right? You don't outwit Herod. Herod's thought of everything. Herod has a plan for his plan. Right? He knows when Herod gets outwitted, Herod gets furious. And when Herod gets furious, people suffer. When Herod gets furious, people die. Because he had spent his whole life, and men, listen to me, this is us. He had spent his whole life controlling outcomes. He had spent his whole life negotiating outcomes, manipulating circumstances, so that no matter what happened, he would be able to figure his way out to control the outcome. Even when he bet on the wrong leader of Rome, he figured his way out of that. He was bold enough and crafty enough to figure out a way to even control that outcome. He's the master of controlling outcomes. And once again, he thought he had figured out how to outsmart destiny. And in the end, he had been outsmarted by a baby and a couple of Jewish parents. And he decided that no matter what happened, he would not be thwarted. He would certainly not be thwarted in the end by a toddler king. Verse 16, he gave orders. And this part, it just bothers all of us. We can never imagine giving these orders. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. Orders that you can't, this is sickening, right? Hey guys, if you're not gonna bring me the one, if you're not gonna locate the one or help me locate the one, then we're just gonna go with the nuclear option, right? We're just gonna kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity. And so they did. One horrible morning, the soldiers roll into town, this little village and all the surrounding villages, and they go door to door to door, to every house, to every hut, to every farmhouse. And they pull out any little boy that looks like he could be that age, and they murder him right in front of his family. They murder his family too if they get in the way. And Mary lived with the knowledge of that her whole life. Mary lived with the knowledge of that. Can you imagine what it would be like to carry that burden? And here's what happened, and this is the part Matthew doesn't tell you, is that very, very soon, in fact, historically, we think within that same year, Herod died. A terribly, terribly, terribly painful death because of this kidney disease. In fact, it was so painful that he actually tried to commit suicide, which was a dangerous option in the first century world. Committing suicide in ancient times, especially in the first century, is very difficult. It's painful and it's risky. There's not a lot of painless options, and there's not a lot of guarantee that it's going to work. But he's in so much pain that Herod sits down and he begins trying to stab himself to death. And his cousin walks in at the last minute, sees him in the act, and saves him. And so Herod is saved only to continue to suffer. This is a miserable, miserable, miserable old man. And just before he died, just to show you how miserable, just before he died, Herod put out an edict. He gave a command. He said, I want you to round up all the wealthy, influential, distinguished men in Jerusalem. I want you to round them up and put them in prison. And the hour that I die, you are to execute all of those men so that someone will be mourning on the day of my death. See, he knew that the day he died, there would be a party to rival all parties on the streets of Jerusalem. People would be overjoyed. And so to guarantee somebody would be crying, he had all these men rounded up and put into prison, and an edict sent out that on the hour of my death, you're to execute all of them. And Herod died. And contrary to his orders, they released these guys. Because even they recognized something wrong with Herod. After Herod died, verse 19, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. For those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. And isn't it, in this little twist of history, Herod, just think about this for a minute. Herod, who's known as Herod the Great, right? Herod, the king of Judea, Herod the Great, and this incredible twist of fate that we believe was providential. Herod the Great, who did so many amazing things, becomes a footnote to the story of Jesus, the toddler. Right? Unthinkable in the first century world. Could you imagine trying to have a one-on-one with Herod right before he died, trying to explain to him in the last few hours of his life, say, Herod, I've got good news and I got bad news. I'm going to start with the good news. The good news is this: 2,000 years from now, 2,000 plus years from now, people all over the world are going to be telling a story that has you in it. Right? People are going to be telling your story. He's like, that's fantastic. In fact, Herod, all over the world, in languages you can't imagine, in places that haven't even been discovered yet, people are going to gather in rows and in circles, and they're going to read a story. They're going to read a story that has you in it. That's fantastic. Oh, no, Herod, that's the good news. Let me tell you the bad news. You're simply a B character. You're simply a sidebar. You're simply a footnote in the story of a toddler who became the king and the king who became the savior of the world. And people aren't going to talk about what you built, Herod. People won't talk about the seaport. People won't talk about the aqueducts. People won't talk about the temple. The temple won't be there anymore. Herod, you're going to be known in most circles as Herod the butcher, not Herod the builder. And you were 5 miles away, Herod. You were 5 miles away from the birth of the Son of God, and you missed your opportunity because you were trying to protect something that couldn't be protected. You were trying to change fate. You were trying to block destiny. 80 years later, so Herod dies. 80 years later, Jesus is at this point grown up to be a man. He's performed miracles, died on the cross. He's been raised from the dead, ascended to be with the Father. 80 years have gone by. Caesar is long gone. Tiberius is long gone. Nero is long gone. The temple's been completely destroyed. It's just, they scraped it off the Temple Mount, right? All that work, all those years that he poured into this project, all that glory of the Jewish temple that Herod spent so much of his life developing, it's all gone. And 80 years later, John the Apostle, John the Beloved, John, the one who actually took Mary from the foot of the cross, because Jesus commissioned him at his death. He said, John, I want you to take care of her like she's your mom. And Mary, I want you to look at John like he's your son. John, who walked with Mary all those years. John, who heard the birth narratives over and over. John, who had the opportunity to ask over and over, Mary, what was it like fleeing to Egypt like that? Mary, what was it like to know you were carrying the Son of God? Mary, what was it like when you got news that your friends had all lost their children because of your son, Jesus? Mary, what was it like? I mean, John heard these stories for years because he took care of Mary. He saw every miracle. He watched Jesus do things that nobody had ever done before. John watched Jesus die. The John who peered into the empty tomb, who saw the resurrected Savior, he's now an old man. 80 years have gone by. He's an old man. He's looking back on all of this narrative that we just read. He's thinking back on all of it. He's heard the stories firsthand. He's seen the miracles, and he decides to sit down. He's read the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He's seen what stories they've covered. And at the beginning of his Gospel, he goes, how am I going to start this thing? How am I going to wrap all of this up? And in John chapter 1, verse 4, I love what he says. He says this, in him was life. In him was life, and that light was the light of all mankind. So he sits there, he's thinking back, and he goes, in Jesus, the guy that he saw come back to life, the person that he spent so much concentrated time with, person who changed his life, in him was, past tense, life. And that life was the light of all mankind, not just the Jews. See, at first we thought it was just the Jews. At first we thought he was just the Messiah, the one who was sent to take care of us. But now we realize, looking back, that the temple had been destroyed and his message was that he had come for all mankind. We remember because he told us to go out into all the world and to share the gospel. This is for everybody. At first we just thought it was for us, but now we realize it's for everybody. In him was life, and that light was, past tense, the light of all mankind. And then he pauses. And he chooses to move from the past tense. This is what I did see. This is what I did, but this is what I experienced. He moves from the past tense to the present tense to send you a message and to send me a message. He then switches. He says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And then he says this, the light shines, present tense. The light shines in the darkness. And the darkness has not, present tense, overcome it. Right. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. He shifts tenses because he wants you to know that the darkness has not overcome. And this is important because if anybody had good reason to believe that the darkness won, it's John. He watched his rabbi die. He watched all of his friends are all dead at this point, right? He's the only one remaining. He's been exiled to Patmos. It looks like that Rome has won. It looks like the ancient Jewish temple system is over, never to be resurrected. Ancient Judaism is gone forever. He's lost everything. And yet he looks back on what he experiences and he goes, you know what? That light continues to shine right now. I know it looks crazy out there. I know that things are hard. I know things seem chaotic. I know that when politics seem weird, when the world seems weird, when culture seems weird, he goes, let me remind you, the darkness has not swallowed up that light that started 2,000 years ago when it came into the world. That darkness has not blown out that light. And I think the same is true of you. And here's what I mean. Why do we return to this story every year? And we come back to it year after year after year. And I've been thinking a lot about this because there's so much darkness out there. And some of us have had a hard year. Some of the hurts, some of the wounds, some of the betrayal, some of the challenges. It's been hard out there. And we come back to this story year after year after year because I believe there's a light inside you that won't go out. There's a light inside you that says there's got to be more going on here. And so it raises the question, what will your story be in relationship to the light of the world? What will my story be in relationship to the light of the world? Will it be one like Herod's? Will it be one of resistance, of trying to fight fate, of being angry and trying to preserve scenarios and outcomes? Will you take your cue from the wise men? Will your story be a story of worship? Just whatever you want from me. Will it be a story that you spent your whole life like Herod trying to build a kingdom instead of an invitation to participate in a kingdom? Will your story be that you clung tightly as you could to the things of this world that eventually you'll have to give up anyway? Will it be the story of a man or a woman who surrendered everything that came their way because they realized that it wasn't even theirs to begin with? See, there's a tension, isn't there? Because there's a Herod inside all of us. We're human. And you know what's true is that one day somebody's going to be forced to tell your story in relationship to the light of the world. And either they're going to have to make something up or they'll be able to tell the true story of how at some point in your life, even though it got tough, even though it's hard out there, even though it looked like the darkness had won, even though you were tempted to lose hope, even though life just sort of stomped out all that faith and that light inside of you, that at some point you chose to continue to believe there is a light and the darkness has not won. Now, someone's going to tell your story. And the question that you have to answer, the question I have to answer, is what story do you want told? And the good news, I mean, this is just amazing. The good news is the darkness, John said, the darkness has not overcome. That's just true. That's why we keep coming back to this. All the darkness that you've experienced, all that you've seen, all the disappointment, all the unanswered prayers, all the people who didn't do what they were supposed to do, all the hypocrisy that you've seen out there and the hurts, whatever it is, all that darkness has still not overcome. Darkness does not get the final word. And darkness cannot blow out that light. So I urge you today, this Christmas season, I mean, who are you in this story? Are you the Herod pacing the throne room, trying to control everything? Or are you the John who, despite everything, goes, darkness hadn't overcome. There's still a light. Some rest. Lord Jesus, thank you for preserving the story of your arrival here. A story that stands on its own, but even more compelling when we look at the life of Herod, the sinister character, but then we have to contend with the fact that there's a Herod inside each of us. And we can choose to continue to feed that Herod. We can take our cue from the wise men, take our cue from John. We can choose, despite the darkness, to worship you, to bow prostrate before you, to offer you our lives without even knowing what you'll ask of us. More than just singing. We can choose, like John, to just continue to believe that there's a light and that the darkness has not overcome. So come what may, we'll never get over what we experienced in you. So Jesus, we celebrate the arrival of your light here in this dark world where things do feel scary. Things do feel chaotic. Things do feel overwhelming. But if John could outlive Nero, if John could outlive Herod, if John could outlive witnessing your divine life extinguished on the cross, if he could survive seeing all of his friends die and still be able to say, the darkness has not overcome, then there's a good chance that none of the darkness going on in our world will overcome either. And we can say the same thing he does. So would you use this time to refresh our hearts? We don't want these to just be stories or words on a page. We want to pivot from the what to the so what. How are we going to live? And friends, to help us process that in this moment of reflection, Ashton is going to lead us through some questions as we conclude.